Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar here with HYCU. I'm very, very excited about today's session. While most of you are joining, we're going to give it a few seconds for everybody to get comfortable and to get ready for what I think is going to be a very interesting session, especially if your organization relies on GitHub. My name is Andy Fernandez. I'm the Senior Director of the Product Marketing team here at HYCU, and I'm joined by Satia Sankaran, who's our Head of Cloud Products. Satia, how are you doing?
Doing good and a great topic today. So look forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely. Satya's conversation today with me is going to be fully recorded. You will have access to the slides. You will have access to the recording. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function, and we will make sure to address them on the fly, or Satya and I will take a few minutes at the end to answer any of the questions. If for some reason we are bombarded with questions, we'll make sure that we can send you an email with a direct response to your question. But we're looking forward to a very engaging discussion today. We want to ask you questions and see how your organization is responding. But let's get started. Satya, the focus of today's conversation really is to understand one, why, and not that anybody needs to hear this, why is GitHub data so critical? Why it must be protected? What is your responsibility when you're consuming a Git repository that's as a service versus a self-hosted one? And of course, we're going to talk through what are your options. How are you going to protect? How are you going to store? And how are you going to comply with this data, especially if you're in financial services, if you are in the EU and under DORA, you name it. And of course, we're going to walk through a live demo of a day in the life of a HYCUer who is restoring something within GitHub as well. So with that being said, let's get started a little bit, especially for those who are maybe just hearing about haiku and you're wondering, is it a Japanese poem? Is it an acronym? What is it? It's many things. And as Satya and I already discussed, but the whole focus and the reason why you have a data protection provider talking to you about GitHub, which usually, we're talking to you about virtual machines, about file shares, about cloud infrastructure. The reason we're talking to you about GitHub is because our focus and our mission is to build a safer world through the universal protection of data. So it doesn't matter what the workload is. It doesn't matter where the workload is. Our focus and goal is to help you protect it and help you recover data when you need it most. We're globally recognized. This number, Satya, continues to grow with over 4,600 organizations that trust us. Every day, I probably have to change this slide. Doesn't matter what country you are in, doesn't matter what region, HYCU is there with our channel ecosystem and our organization to be able to help you. But let's get started. Let's just get right into the weeds. Let's talk GitHub. A lot of the conversations that we have today, by the way, are going to be explicit to GitHub. If you're using GitLab, if you're using Bitbucket, it doesn't really matter. The principles are the same. The best practices are the same. But the first focus that we want to have a conversation on is, why is GitHub so critical? What kind of information is being stored? And a lot of the times, it doesn't even beg the question, right? Because that's where your source code lives. But as we all know, whether we like it or not, and how developers leverage GitHub, it is extremely, extremely critical. It is your library, it is your source code, it is your IP. Satya, when you think about how organizations that we're talking to all the time, they're thinking about tier one applications as their virtual machines that touch production. They're thinking about critical files. They're thinking about M365, but this understanding of GitHub begs the question: is protecting GitHub as critical as some of these other workloads? What's your experience been with that, Satya?
Yeah, Andy, these days, practically every company is a tech company, right? I remember talking to a wiring manufacturer company just last week and kind of finding out how much code they have in robotics, in data processing, in IoT, and all of these things. And that's all sitting there as a code in every organization, right? Whether you're a manufacturer, whether you're a healthcare company, whether you are a legal firm, at this point, every organization has a tech arm that holds what differentiates them, right? It's a big differentiator for companies, and it's the crown jewel for a lot of companies. And or you're a tech company like us, where our primary asset is two things: one, our customers; two, our code and IP, right? So when you look at a data set that's kind of elevated to that level, you need to make sure that you have the proper protection in place. You need to have insurance, right? In as a personal thing, you always make sure you protect your house, you protect your car with insurance. And when it comes to source code, it's at the same level. It's one of your most important asset, and you need to make sure that you have an insurance policy for that.
It's I think it's also it's not just necessarily that it's so critical to your organization that you need to have insurance, aka data protection for it as well. But it's also the fact that people elsewhere, specifically bad actors, understand that this is where your critical data is and where your differentiation in your IP. So when you look at some of the most intensive focus of supply chain attacks, it's going to be in places like GitHub, simply because that's a very, very high ROI activity if you're able to breach a customer's repository or even breach the vendor themselves. But Satya, as we've talked about the criticality of GitHub, one of the most dangerous gaps and misconceptions right now is, well, who is it responsible? Who's responsible for this, right? Like I'm no longer hosting my repos as a server deployment on a VM somewhere that I know that I'm responsible for the availability of it. But the real misconception that we see, and this is from our State of SaaS report, Satya, is that to this day, way more than half of organizations surveyed, they think that the responsibility for this SaaS application, aka GitHub, is the vendor's responsibility. Why do you think this misconception exists, Satya? Like, what do you think goes in the mind of somebody who historically has done everything to protect mission critical workloads on-prem? All of a sudden, they subscribe to a fancy cloud service, and then you see this gray area develop. Like, how do you think that happens?
Yeah, I mean it's normal with change to some extent, but also keep in mind that when things are operating within the four walls of your data center, you had a team that took care of these things, and this is what they thought about every single day: ensure how to keep the lights up and running, ensure you have backups, and so on. Where we are in is there is a lot of disaggregation and going on with respect to various services. It's great. Look, for the number one SaaS data protection company, that's great for business, right? But the fact is, people are using the best tools, people are using the best services available for every single this thing, and source code is not immune to that trend. People aren't saying my source code needs to be sitting in a repo within the four walls of my data center. People are comfortable moving their most important asset to a service. But it's very important. Again, whether you're a VP of engineer, you are a CTO of a company, or a director responsible for this, very important to understand where your responsibility starts and where the provider's responsibility ends. I think that delineation is not very clear. It may be clear to the infrastructure folks, at least they're catching up because cloud has been a great educator of this. But as you go outside the infrastructure folks, that delineation is not quite clear, and I'm sure you're going to walk them through where that line is and what you need to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely, Satya. One of the things and we notice this all the time with organizations, regardless of the vertical, regardless of the size of the company, it's just that very, very big gray area. And we've always run away with this parking garage and vehicle analogy that we have here. But the reality is that you have to treat any cloud provider, any SaaS vendor like a parking garage. And what we mean by that specifically is, think, what does Satya do? Satya lives in New Jersey. I'm sure there are many parking garages in New Jersey. When Satya goes to a parking garage, what does he expect, right? He expects to be able to access the place for the payment to process and for him to receive a receipt, for him to go into the garage, park it. When he comes back with his family, the car's still there. But if his kids lower the window and somebody steals his laptop or some other property, or somebody scratches his car or hits his car and Satya doesn't have insurance, is the parking garage going to pay, especially in New Jersey? Are they going to actually pay Satya for the site? Absolutely not, right? So, Satya, when we think about breaking down this explicit responsibility, and by the way, this is all in GitHub's documentation and legal language too, it's really helping to understand what is GitHub responsible, by the way, or any other SaaS service or any other repository, Git repo service that you're using, and what are you responsible, right? So let's play the game and make it very clear, Satya, right? If there is a global outage that affects GitHub, who is responsible for restoring that?
They're responsible for restoring the service, not your
Exactly.
data. Yep.
Exactly. If a service goes down, if there is a major supply chain issue, if there's anything that happens to your ability to access GitHub, that is not your responsibility. That is contractually GitHub's responsibility to have high availability, to have TR. In order to maintain a secure service that you can trust that is being done and architected with security, that's also on GitHub. But if you have no MFA enabled, if you are not, if your password hasn't rotated for 3 years and everybody knows it within the office, if you are allowing your contractors to continue accessing GitHub even after they've exited your organization, if you do not have any of these access controls, that's not on GitHub. It's impossible for GitHub, based on change rate, to understand, did Satya delete this repository because he's cleaning up, or did Satya make a mistake, or is Satya really upset and disgruntled and all of a sudden going on a deletion spree, right? So these are the things to think about very clearly. But when it comes to your behavior, your engineer's behavior, your contractor's behavior around GitHub and what they do with that data, that responsibility sits within your organization. It doesn't within GitHub. It would be impossible for GitHub to understand, did you mean to do that? Did you not mean to do that? Okay, let's help you restore. No, you need to be able to have data protection in your own hands. And by the way, this applies to Microsoft 365. This applies to Salesforce. But Satya, what's kind of your perspective on this? Because I think customers really enjoy being able to see every single core use case between who's responsible for what. Because sometimes it's even in the legal language, it's really, really hard to understand this.
Yeah, and look, I'll just say, if that line is not clear, it's still your most important asset, right? And you need to ensure that asset is protected. So I think that there used to be a saying that nobody ever got fired for doing an extra backup, or nobody ever got fired for buying from IBM, right? It's the same story here, right? You have an obligation, because it is the most important asset for your company, to protect it and ensure an additional level of protection exists. I mean, I remember GitHub's primary competitor out there had an outage, a few years ago, where they had to even live stream how they do recovery. And I think, there are a lot of things that I want to do. Doing restores live stream to 100,000 people is not one of them, right? And what we need to make sure is even primary backup mechanisms could fail. Just having a clone available somewhere is not a backup strategy. In the world of backups, there is best practices, 3-2-1, having a copy in 3 different places and 2 different medias and so on. All of these you need to enable. So it's not just about protecting your data set, but doing it in a way that is tamper proof, that is going to protect you against all possible outcomes. That's what backup solutions exist for, and why you should use them.
Absolutely, Satya. And one of the things that people also, there are certain steps of not the steps of grief, but the steps to understanding your responsibility for data protection. And one of them is, the gut reaction of any admin of any application, regardless of whether it's GitHub or Salesforce, is, well, my first instinct is to make it very, very difficult for anybody to delete data so that I can minimize, the Murphy's Law within my organization and within my workloads. But let's talk a little bit about what are some of the specific threats. And we're going to spend a lot of time on what are the operational data loss incidents. But something to keep in mind here is, if your organization goes through heavy M&A, if your organization has a heavy reliance on contractors, on other development shops, if your organization, if you can't name all of your employees anymore, even within your team, you're all in insider threat territory, right? That's something that no one really speaks about. It's not really addressed, but it is a reality. And if you're thinking about the scope of insider threats and what are some of the most dangerous areas where you could have an insider threat, it's in your IP and it's in your source code, especially if so many different members of your organization are already accessing it. And that's not even counting all of the new deletion scenarios, Satya, that we're going to see with agents, with people's leverage use of AI and what that's going to do from a data protection perspective, right? How are people going to find new and unique ways to delete data within their repositories? But we did an exercise, Satya, myself, our engineering team, and we went through and really sat down to understand how are all the possible ways where we could fully delete alter in a permanent state anything within our repositories. We did this exercise even at HYCU. And frankly, we wrote a blog on it where there were over 30 documented ways where it's relatively easy to go and lose access. But we put together a bunch of examples here and public examples of folks who are accidentally deleted repositories. These are operational issues. There is no malicious incident. This is simply all of us being human. What are the ways in which we can delete data? But Satya, I know you've got some experience. You've been through this before. What are some of the common ones that you've seen?
Yeah, look, I think there's a saying, right? To err is human, right? I say to delete main is a developer, right? If you've done it at some point in your career, and also like look, Git is a version control mechanism, right? And so there is a sense that it has got some level of protection already built in. Um, but the thing that people don't recognize in terms of failure, what's so not obvious is, identity becomes a crucial element because it's version control and your version sits right next to the data that you are trying to have version control for. And an identity failure, someone gets access to one of your key admin accounts, you're all a sitting duck in one place, a very convenient way to get rid of it. I mean, that's got to be like the worst case outcome for any organization is somebody breached that identity barrier. And not to shill for our product. And this is why we protect Entra ID, we protect Okta. It's not just about GitHub. We protect a whole bunch of things around GitHub as well, when it comes to Atlassian, Okta, Entra ID, and so on. The other thing that I think is you're seeing very often, Andy, these days is there is this awareness around patch, right? Personal access tokens that just sit there in source code for a lot of places. And I think the odds are something like if you scrape three code repositories, your odds are you're going to find at least one token somewhere, right? So those are not great odds to be working with, and those are like clear areas where everything could fall apart.
Absolutely, Satya. And there's so many possible permutations in which you can lose data. And there's obviously, of course, all these external threats, not just insider threats either, right? I mean, go take a look at the second coming of HYCU and what that's done and kind of the havoc that it's wreaked within GitHub organizations as well. So one of the key reasons we wanted to discuss as well too is because we always talk about worst case scenarios. We always discuss operational recovery, and everyone's fully aware. Yes, that's happened to me. I've personally made a mistake. Somebody has ran a script. Somebody's corrupted something in my organization. There's no organization where that doesn't happen. But where sometimes folks build some mythology is, well, we haven't had a security incident. We're probably not going to have one. That's just not something that's going to happen to us. And from that same survey where we went and interviewed over 500 IT leaders, we found that over 65% of them had a SaaS security incident. So whether it was GitHub, whether it was Salesforce, whether it was an identity service itself, there was some form of incident that took place. So the reality is, and I know this is a extremely cliche term, but it's not if, but when, right? I hate saying that because everyone uses it, but the reality is true. It is going to happen, and it probably will happen multiple times. And a lot of the times, your organization probably has a very good understanding of the economics of downtime for your virtual or cloud infrastructure, right? Whether it's from a DR perspective, you understand what does 30 minutes of downtime look like in a tier 1 VM. But do you have that understanding of what does downtime of GitHub look like? What happens if I lose access for 2, 3 days? What happens if I lose critical source code data? Like what's the cost associated to that, right? So this data isn't specific to GitHub, but it's specific to SaaS applications. And we found that of the 65% that experienced a breach, 87% of them had some form of a disruption scenario. The average cost per day of that disruption scenario was over 400 grand. The average disruption period was 5 working days. We're talking over $2 million in potential losses. Now, keep in mind, this is the mean average between very large organizations and mid-market organizations who to answer this. So depending on the size of your organization, it could be a little less or it could be way more. But the reality is that the same rigor that we have with critical VMs and critical infrastructure, we need to have with services like GitHub as well. But now let's walk through a quick checklist because a lot of you are probably thinking, whether you're looking at this as the lens of, I'm aware that there could be a potential security incident, I'm aware that could be data loss, and I need a way to make sure that I can recover that when it happens. Or your organization now has to go through a DORA or a NIS2 mandate, and you have customers or your organization runs in the EU, and you have to have documented backup and recovery for things that touch customer data like GitHub. So we put together a quick checklist here. This checklist is going to apply to everything from GitHub to Jira, Confluence, you name it. And Satya's already alluded to this a little bit, but it's not as complex as it may seem. And it is following the same fundamentals that your IT team has been following for decades. The first one is you want to make sure that your backups are automated. Simply, can I assign backups and do I know that every single day at the designated period of time that my backups are effective and that I've received a notification that it works? The most critical part here as well is offsite storage. You need a logical separation. If something happens at the source, if something happens to GitHub, if something happens to your instance of GitHub, your organization needs to know that in a separate hyperscaler, in a separate storage location, you have complete copies of your repositories that you can always restore from. This 3-2-1 rule, everyone on-prem is fully aware of it, right? Satya, like everyone knows this. This is essentially embedded in the mind of every IT administrator. But when it comes to SaaS applications, it's not really followed. And of course, you want to make sure, as Satya mentioned, that these are tamper-proof backups. But one key part here is if you haven't tested your ability to recover this, then you don't have a backup because you just simply don't know how it's going to work unless you've gone through serious resilience testing. And you need to be able to make sure that you can restore data when you need it. You do not simply need another archiving solution as well. Satya, when you look at a lot of the misconceptions out there, a lot of the best practices, any recommendations that you have for folks saying, I'm aware of the issue, I'm going to take matters into my own hands, I'm going to solve this, any other guidance or feedback that you have?
Yeah, look, I also think one of the things that we didn't talk more about is also granular recovery, right? To kind of revert back to an old version of a repo is not always a viable option. I mean, it's not like you can go into an office and say, "Hey, I'm going to turn off my router and turn it back on." That's not an option. It's an option that affects too many people. So being able to have that granular recovery to be able to just pull back one PR or one issue, that's just as important in this context as well. And so having a solution in place to perform automated recovery, to perform recovery of a lot of things, and the whole thing comes crashing down, or to be able to recover just enough and be very precise with your recovery, it's all important. As they say, it's all about recovery at the end of the day when it comes to backups, right? And that's the part you need to nail.
Absolutely. And, Satya, when we looked at, well, how are folks doing this today in that same survey? What we found was that the most fundamental best practices of data protection are not being applied to SaaS apps like GitHub. So less than a third are doing any form of automated backups. Definitely less than a third are having any offsite copies of the data. And 25% are actually testing whether they can recover or not, Satya. So what we're seeing is there's a massive gap between the criticality and how susceptible this data is to how serious organizations are about protecting them. So this is a very, very dangerous gap that must be bridged within organizations. But let's talk through options, Satya. Let's actually talk through whether I'm an IT admin assigned to help my organization protect GitHub, or I'm within the development organization and I've been assigned to help the organization. You've got a couple of options to think about, right? The gut reaction on the development side is to clone. The gut reaction probably on the IT side is to say, hey, well, we can script some API exports and migrate. GitHub has APIs that allows me to do that. Those are the first two reactions that folks have. There are several reasons why that, although that is a good idea from the sense that you're showing initiative to be able to protect, there are some potential gaps you might want to understand, right? First is, are you actually backing up and covering not only your metadata, but other critical objects within GitHub, right? Your issues, your pull requests, your discussions, your wikis, you name it. Many times, a lot of the coverage is incomplete. Satya also mentioned the ability or the need for critical restore and the ability to restore back in place if something goes wrong. You're also talking through single points of failures. You have to manage scheduling yourself, and if you're handling the exports yourself, then you also have to handle rate limiting yourself as well. So there's a lot of core gaps when you're thinking about leveraging cloning or leveraging API exports. But Satya, what's your perspective here? Because we all know, and everyone's first gut reaction is to say, well, what can I do with the current tooling that I have available to simply cover this gap?
Yeah, look, cloning isn't going to help you pass compliance, right? And it just you went through a checklist. How many items in that checklist can a clone actually can check off, right? Yeah. And also, an export that you ran in 2023 is not going to help you pass an audit. And look, it's not going to protect you. I think there was a very famous robotics lab where when they lost. I think they had a copy from a couple of years ago. They said they lost the equivalent of two PhDs worth of research in that process of a data loss, right? That's not the situation you want to be looking at. And when you look at backup options, there are two more things that I want to highlight that's not here. Think about a backup option that can not only protect your source code, but everything around your source code, right? Your identity, your build infrastructure, your automation infrastructure like Terraform, Circle, CI, and so you need an Atlassian, right? How many of our developer infrastructure, like we will have access to source code, but imagine losing access to Jira completely or losing Confluence completely. It's a road, it's a map. I mean, it's like the world exists, but I don't know where to go. It's like a map for developers to know what I need to do next. And I think you need to be looking at an entire this thing and a solution that you choose. You don't want to be building a backup solution, one for GitHub, one for Jira, one for Confluence, and one for Terraform and all of these things. You want to be looking at a solution that can actually protect, all of these different pieces as well. So again, you're talking to developers. There is always a tendency to build something, and which is great. That's what makes us all developers. But in this context, you want to build something or leverage something that is standard across, everything else we use as well.
Absolutely, Satya. And there's this element too of what is the trade-off between the amount of time, especially let's not go through cloning, but even on the API exports, for you to build something that meets compliance, the amount of time, energy, and resources spent on building, scheduling, and maintaining something like that is already a very, very significant time commitment. Whether you're doing that for GitHub or even trying to build your own backups on a Jira or on a Confluence or even a Salesforce, there is also a trade-off not only in the ability to or the inability to recover to meet compliance, but also the amount of time that your organization is spending on something that's about keeping the lights on, right, Satya? So there's an element here too of there's a trade-off decision that needs to be made. So
Yeah.
now we've talked through mirroring, we've talked through or cloning, we've talked through, kind of building your own using the APIs. We're going to kind of discuss what HYCU is able to do within your organization. And as Satya mentioned, we're not simply a point solution to go and protect GitHub. Our mission, our focus, everything that we do is about protecting your data estate. And when we talk about data estate, we're actually talking about your entire technology stack from your production workloads, regardless of where they are, whether it's on-prem, whether it's public cloud, whether it's in multiple clouds, but also all of your critical SaaS applications as well. Our focus is to give you the ability to protect everything. And the reason this is so important is think about where your organization is. You most likely have an on-prem footprint. That footprint is going nowhere, but you've also most likely adopted public cloud for certain use cases, and you absolutely are using SaaS applications. If you are starting to build point backup solutions for your organization or buy point backup solutions across the board, you're going to start building a data protection stack that is going to grow and grow and grow. And you're going to have to manage different support teams. You're going to have to manage different documentation and manage different views simply for data protection. Our view is that that is unacceptable in 2025, and your organization needs a vendor that it can rely on for everything. So as Satya delivers this kind of day in the life demo, think of this in the context of everything that we're showing you for GitHub is purpose built for GitHub. It's using GitHub APIs. It has deep object coverage, but you also have this across everything else, whether it's in your tool chain or whether it's your production application. So, Satya, why don't we just get right into it, show folks what our cloud looks like, and let's dive into that restore point because we know that that is the biggest gap when it comes to APIs and cloning.
Sounds good. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Andy, do let me know if you can see my
We can see
cloud.
it.
Okay. And are you seeing the rCloud login page?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. So look, I think if you're a GitHub user today, you're already leveraging the power of SaaS, right? The ability to get started with nothing to have to deploy, nothing to have to maintain. We always joke about how backup projects used to be a multi-week, multi-month effort, but it's something with our solution you could perform before your first coffee break in the morning, right? And that's because you get an invite, and once you get an invite, you sign in, and things are available for you to go set up almost immediately, right? And so it's a SaaS service. Really, all you need is an invite to get started, and we can walk you through some of the capabilities that is built in. I think the first thing that I'll quickly show you is, we have this concept of rGraph, where if you connect your identity platform to our solution, we can actually look at everything that you're using within your infrastructure, right? This is just at the engineering level, and I can actually show this to you at a subscription level, and you're going to see a big map of every single service that you use within our service. So this is just to show like the sheer number of services that you could be protecting. Another view you could see this is all the different connectors that are available to you. And let's say I pick repositories, you could see that this is a solution. We're talking about GitHub here, but if you are thinking GitLab, or if you were previously at Bitbucket and now trying to move to GitHub in any, or you have some projects that use one source code repository and some in the other, know that this is a solution that can protect you on all three of these major source code platforms, whether it's GitHub, whether it's GitLab, whether it's Bitbucket, you've got a solution available. And if you've got lots of developers and that use more than one repo, you've got answers here from the solution perspective, right? And getting started is really simple with any of these solutions. It's kind of built on a connector model. You simply come in here, you configure, you choose OAuth authentication, and really just set up your credentials. And from that point onwards, we have the ability to go discover every single repository that you create in your source code repository. You simply add at the organization level, and from there, we could look at everything inside that organization. And as new repositories emerge, it automatically starts getting picked up by the solution, and it is something that you can see right here in here, right? So this is, again, a SaaS view. And in my world, I am protecting a lot of things: Jira, Confluence, Okta, GitLab, all of these workloads. But we're going to focus on Git today. So let's look at Git. I've got both those Gits. So let's see what I'm protecting. These are a bunch of repositories that we are protecting. A benefit of a solution like this is, everywhere you've got this concept of, hey, I've got these production repos that serve, production applications. I've got these research projects, which are just as important, but just not being used by customers today. I've got all these internal tooling. And you may have different retention, different frequency for backups, and all of these things. Just know that at each level, you could go apply a policy that says, hey, I want this data protected with a certain set of policies that says how long I want to keep it, how often I want to back up, and so on. So let's show you what that policy looks like. Within the policy, you define again, how often you want to back up and how long you want to retain, and where do you want to ship this data, and if there are any, again, labels and tags that we want to associate with, and also where do you want to move this copy. The 3-2-1 rule that Andy talked about, you can define that by actually showing and doing a backup locally, but also moving and having a copy sitting somewhere else. I think there was a company, I forgot the name right now, but their entire AWS repo got impacted, and every single repo artifact, every single thing was just deleted. So you don't also want to have a situation where everything is in one place, and then it becomes easy for a nefarious actor to go and cause chaos, right? And that's what solution like this protects. And again, if you were to build all of this on your own, you not only have to have integrations into one cloud provider, potentially integrations to different cloud providers, and so on, right?
And
So
Satya, just one question as well, because especially with applications with such a high change rate, and maybe some are much more critical than others, how many times a day can somebody perform a GitHub backup or even schedule the frequency for?
yeah, it's really a whole of whatever your change rate suggests. But one of the key things to keep in mind with HYCU is that we are doing this incrementally, right? So only the changes get backed up with every one of those. A lot of people, when they perform clone operations, or they just create multiple clones as backups, I mean, you're effectively moving all of that data from one place to another. Whereas with a solution like ours, this is an incremental backup that you can perform. So once you set it up, it's really that easy. You can see all of your repos. You can see when they were backed up. You can see all of these recovery points that are available to me, and is really truly set and forget. But you forget until you actually need to do restores, right? So restore is really just go look at all of your recovery points. You identify an incident and say, hey, I want to go ahead and do a restore at that point. And what you're going to see is with our solution, one of the other things that I want to highlight is, because this is IP, it's important to note where that data sits, right? And where that data sits is completely in your control. We are not one of those backup solutions that exfiltrates your data and stores it in a different location. We actually will keep the data in your S3 buckets or Azure Blob Storage or wherever. And when you are restoring, we're actually going ahead, and that's the time we look at what is stored in those backups and actually show you. I've staged a couple of places. Time looks like I got timed out. But there are, again, a couple of places where you can quickly see, what I'm trying to protect and restore, and actually perform a granular recovery of those particular workloads. And you could do search, you could do restore, you could do export. And again, another thing to highlight is, hey, God forbid GitHub has a long outage, right? It's happened before. I think GitLab had a 6-hour outage, not too long ago, right? So in those cases, you want to be able to have access to your source code, and that's what export really allows you to do. We can restore even without GitHub up and running, right? You can restore the source code in an archive format, and you can look at and so on. And that's all kind of built into the solution right here, and is what you can do with the solution, right? And again, when you back up at the repo level. But we talked about scenarios where, saying, hey, let's just go back 2 days ago is not quite an option for a lot of people. And for one per person's, error, you're not going to do that. So what you have is the ability to restore at a granular level. You can restore at a pull request level for your data set. You can restore at an issue level at your data set. So you get the granularity, you get the comprehensiveness of protection, but you get the precision for recovery. I think that's something that you get with our solution, and you could do that against any of your versions that you've protected. You can do this from any of the copies that you've stored, not just your primary copy. If you made another copy in another cloud provider, or even archive it, we'll be able to do all of these things across these workloads and what a solution purpose built for GitHub can deliver. Oh, Andy, I think you're on mute.
Oh, thanks, Sadia. One of the things that folks kind of miss out on sometimes is also understanding the impact that it has on speed. So, whether it's GitHub or even something like Jira, and your organization has a scenario where, let's say, a specific issue was deleted, very critical issue that you need to restore back. When you think about native options, you have to essentially do an import export and restore an entire project in order to bring back a needle. So you have to bring back the haystack in order to go find the needle. The focus on the recovery side here is not only the ability to precisely restore something without impact API throttling, without having impact on the business, but to be able to actually restore it very, very quickly and get back up and running as well.
Yeah, and again, you could do this at a level where you can restore the whole thing even without access to GitHub, which I think is very, very important. And you can also think of scenarios where you may be in the middle of moving from one code repo to another code repo. These solutions can be a huge help in that context.
No, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for this, Satya. And we're going to address a couple of hard-hitting questions too, because a lot of the conversations that people have is, well, where are my backups going? Who's in control of them? What does that look like? And you and I are going to walk through that. But one thing that I wanted to share as well here is that it's also about making sure that you don't have a superficial GitHub product. A lot of the times folks will build a solution for GitHub, claim that they have services for it, but really there is massive, massive gaps in the object coverage. So not only what am I able to restore, but what's even included in my backup. So one of the focuses that we have at HYCU is to make sure that anything that we protect, that we have very, very deep object coverage for as well. And we'll share this after, and we have a data sheet for you where you can see everything that you're able to back up and everything that you're able to restore. But Satya, you alluded to this during the beginning of the demo, but very, very, very important understanding here for customers is if I were to back up my repos with HYCU, where are those backups living? Where are they stored, and who has access to them?
Yeah, great question. Where are my backups stored? It's almost always stored in an S3 target. We work with industry partners like Dell, where we can also back up to their deduplication appliance that runs again in cloud, but it almost always stores data in an S3 compatible storage. Azure Blob, Google Cloud Storage, AWS S3, and a whole myriad of solutions that are compatible with S3. Two, it's always under your control. It's your bucket where we store your backups. You provide the buckets for backups. So there is no exfiltration of data where it's not leaving the four walls of your virtual network, right? It's always staying within your network, within your domain, and who has access. You can have compartmentalized access to say, hey, this GitHub organization can only be accessed by XYZ people. And you can compartmentalize access for both backup and restores, as well as backup data to whoever you want that to be. And more importantly, it's not about who can have access, but also about who cannot have access. Just know that our backups, you can have encryption that you can get from the cloud provider for the object storage. You can get the second set of encryption through our own HYCU managed keys. And you can also say, hey, I'll bring my own key and I will do a BYOK and encrypt that data. So even if somebody did get access to your cloud account, that doesn't mean they can see all the source code in one place, right? So it is obfuscated, it is encrypted, and someone getting access to your cloud account or your perimeter doesn't automatically see all your source code.
And no, thank you for that, Satya. And a lot of the times, because folks usually encounter managed storage offerings when it comes to something like this, they get very serious limitations on data retention and storage tiers. What are my choices look like with HYCU if I were to back up? Like, can I choose data retention for a few months, for a few years, the storage tiers at which it's retained? Like, what does that look like if I were to start backing up GitHub?
Yeah, no, look, think of us as fully self-driving, not the one we've been promised for years and haven't gotten yet, but But think of us as the full self-driving, but still kind of leaving you under your control, right? You decide where things go and what happens. With our solution, it's always that you are under control, you maintain full ownership. We talk about within our design philosophy, we say we want to build a solution that has 0% burden and 100% ownership, right? So that's what you're going to get with our solution. So you decide what the retention should be, you decide what the frequency should be, and you decide where that data resides and who has access to. So you're fully in driver's seat, even if you aren't driving all the time.
No, thank you so much, Satya. I know that we've had a pretty in-depth conversation with everyone. We're going to share a couple of resources for you, but ultimately, the most important thing that we walk away from this discussion is that regardless if you choose Haiku or not, is that you make the decision to start protecting GitHub effectively so that your organization is protected. Not just GitHub, but so many of these other very critical, but often unprotected SaaS services in your organization. And I'll give you an example. So Satya, when we asked all of these IT leaders, we asked a ton of questions as you saw from the survey today. But we asked an open-ended question and we said, take a look at all of the SaaS applications that your organization uses and tell us which one concerns you the most from a data protection and from a data loss, from a cyber threat perspective. Satya, what do you think was number one and number two that folks proactively said that they were most concerned about?
Good question. And so look, I kind of think about three types of data that I would be most concerned about. One is my IP. Of course, it's what I'm doing all the time, what I'm building. So anything that relates to an IP, SaaS. The other is my customers. I mean, without them, we don't exist in this world. We're all a services. Even a product company is a services company. It's in service of a customer, right? So our customer information. And three, it's whatever is crucial for that identity as we talked about. I mean, those are like the identity information and IP is what I would be thinking about. So maybe M365, hopefully Git was there. And Salesforce, Entra ID. I mean, I'm hoping those are there in the top
You
three
nailed
of
it. You nailed
items.
it. So the total list out of the 500, number one was Salesforce, but a very, very close number two was GitHub. From number three through five, it was very close between Entra ID, Okta, and the whole M365 suite. So this is something that customers are fully aware. Most likely your organization has all of them, and you want to be able to protect them with one place, with one view, with one trusted partner, one trusted advisor to protect that. And what you're looking at right now, this funky looking table of elements, is actually all of the services and infrastructure and applications that Haiku can protect within your organization. Whether you are focused on securing your infrastructure, whether you're focused on securing your tool chain, even your machine learning AI workloads as well, from your data warehouse to your vector databases. It doesn't matter. The whole focus is there is a very high chance that you have unprotected applications within your estate, and it's very critical that you protect them with a vendor that scales and extends to that protection. The last thing that we're going to mention here is the most important thing you can do is actually test Haiku out yourself. Now, you can take a tour here, scan the QR code, and take a look at exactly what Satya was talking about. And you can take this tour for GitHub. You can take it for so many other services that we protect from our marketplace. And the whole focus here is if you have any questions, if you want to sit down and actually walk through best practices and not even have a conversation about Haiku, but what are the best practices I should follow to protect GitHub? Satya and I are more than happy to join a conversation with you as well. But with that being said, we want to thank you all for your time. Satya, thank you so much for the conversation, for the demo. If you have any other questions, Satya and I will address them via email, but we want to thank everybody and hope you have a great day and happy holidays.
Thanks, Andy, for facilitating this.
Cheers, everyone. Take care, Satya.
Thank you.